Quail Springs, Texas, in the year 1884, was a place where the sky did something slow and gold before dark settled over the hills, and it was on a porch overlooking that sky that Clementine Bird finally said the thing she had carried silently for 11 months. She had learned every detail of Bo Cassidy's days, which hour he liked his coffee, which fence line worried him most before a storm, the particular quiet that settled over him on Sundays, and she had done all this noticing without once letting herself wonder what it meant. That evening, with the horses settling into the corral below, she spoke of a trunk back in Abilene, a trunk of half-finished linen she had not looked at since she turned 19. She admitted she had not dreamed of love in so long that she was not certain she would recognize it if it ever arrived. Bo did not answer quickly. He studied her the way he studied whether to trust something, unhurried and deliberate. Then he said the 5 words that would quietly turn the direction of both their lives. "Then dream with me instead." Before the ranch, before Bo, there had been a girl who raised 4 younger siblings almost entirely on her own after her mother's death, and who kept raising them through her father's long, quiet decline in the years that followed, a man who never fully recovered from losing his wife and needed nearly as much care as his own children did. Whatever room Clementine once had for dreaming ahead had shrunk year by year until it held nothing beyond the household's immediate needs, a full pantry, a mended roof, for young lives kept fed and steady. By the time her father passed and her youngest brother married and left for Abilene, Clementine was 26 years old and could not remember a single moment in all those years when anyone had asked what she herself actually wanted. She answered a posted notice for a housekeeper with practical experience and no complicated requirements, packed 1 trunk, and arrived at the Cassidy ranch a stranger to everyone including, in some sense, herself. She was a woman who had spent her whole adulthood managing other people's needs, and had nearly forgotten she was allowed to have any of her own. She arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, trunk balanced against her hip, road dust still clinging to her boots, and found Bo Cassidy mending a section of corral fence himself rather than sending a hand to do it, sleeves rolled, entirely unbothered by the dirt. He looked up, took in the trunk and her travel-worn dress, and asked only one question before anything else. Not about her references. Not about her cooking. He asked whether she had eaten anything since morning. She had not. Without another word, he walked her straight into the kitchen and set bread and butter down in front of her before a single word about wages had passed between them. Watching him do it so naturally, as though it never occurred to him that this was unusual, Clementine thought she had rarely met a man who led with a person's hunger before her usefulness. "Most employers ask what I can do first," she told him once she had eaten. He simply said he figured he would find that out soon enough regardless, and that right then, the food had seemed to matter more. It was a small moment, but it told her everything about the kind of man he was. Bo Cassidy was 32 years old and had run the ranch alone since his father's death 4 years earlier, though the losses stretched back much further than that. His mother had died of fever when he was still a boy. His older brother had been taken by the same influenza that spared Bo seemingly at random the winter he turned 19, a stretch of grief that taught him early just how little control a person truly had over what they were allowed to keep. There had been a woman before Clementine, briefly, 3 years back, a schoolteacher from Fort Worth who found the ranch's isolation harder to love than she expected and left before the second winter, kindly enough, with no real fault on either side, though her leaving still cost him something he never fully spoke of. Watching her wagon disappear down the road, Bo told himself he preferred it that way, that a man who had already lost so much was better off keeping his attachments modest and manageable, easy enough to survive losing if it ever came to that again. It was a quiet, guarded philosophy, and it had worked well enough until Clementine arrived and slowly began to undo it. The months settled into a rhythm neither of them named out loud. Clementine rose before the sun each morning and had coffee waiting by the time Bo came in from checking the stock, and every morning he thanked her the same unhurried way. Every evening they sat together on the porch before she returned to her room in the small house behind the main one, talking about nothing important, the weather, a sick calf, a letter from her brother. By the 3rd month Bo had stopped pretending to himself that his attention toward her was purely practical. By the 6th he had stopped pretending much of anything at all, though he deliberately chose not to say so aloud, wanting to be certain the watching meant for her what it had come to mean for him. She learned his moods, the quiet he carried after visiting his family's graves, how good rain loosened something tight in his shoulders. He learned that she hummed only while kneading bread, and that she checked the horizon twice before hanging the wash, once from habit, and once, he suspected, simply to stand outside a moment longer than she needed to. 7 years before she ever set foot on Cassidy land, Clementine had loved a boy named Gideon Marsh, the blacksmith's son from the next town over, and at 19 she had said yes to marrying him with the uncomplicated certainty of a girl who had never yet learned that wanting things came at a cost. He went to work the railroad camps that spring to save for their future, writing faithfully for 4 months before his letters simply stopped arriving. She wrote twice more herself, careful and uncertain, and received no answer to either one, the silence becoming its own unbearable kind of response. She never learned for certain what became of him, whether fever moving through the camps had taken him, or whether he had simply chosen to move on without explanation. Her mother died 3 months later, and the household's full weight settled onto Clementine before she had room to properly grieve a boy who might not have even been worth grieving. She folded her half-finished trousseau into the bottom of her trunk and did not take it out again for 7 years. The first hard freeze came early that year, catching half the county unprepared, and Beau spent 3 days and nights moving cattle to lower pasture on barely 4 hours of sleep. Days before the freeze, a neighbor's stray herd had wandered onto Cassidy land through a gap in the man's own broken fence, and Beau folded them into his own count without hesitation, unwilling to let another man's animals freeze over a boundary line he had every right to ignore. Clementine told him plainly it was foolishness, that he was not obligated to save a neighbor's herd who had not mended his fence in 2 years, that he was working himself half to death over pride he did not even owe anyone. Beau replied quietly that it was not pride, that cattle did not know whose fence had failed, only that they were cold. She pushed back, saying there was a difference between kindness and simply never learning how to say no to anyone, and something in the sharpness of it caught him off guard, a smile working at his exhausted face despite himself. That winter, alone in her small room, Clementine took the folded trousseau from the bottom of her trunk for the first time in 7 years, running her fingers over stitches sewn by a girl who had never once doubted that wanting a future was safe. She did not cry exactly, she simply sat with it a long while before folding it carefully back into place, though the trunk stayed open longer than she intended. By the following night she found herself, almost without deciding to, sorting which of her belongings she would take if she left, frightened by how naturally her hands remembered the motion of preparing to go before her heart had caught up to admit why. She began a letter to her sister in Abilene, asking whether the position at the Fenwick house was still open, whether it was time she finally came home. She sealed it, then stopped, staring at her own handwriting, recognizing that she was repeating the exact shape of a decision that had cost her everything and given her nothing for 7 long years, leaving before anything could be asked of her at all. She did not send the letter. Instead she sat with it sealed on the table until the lamp burned low, turning the decision over in her mind long after she should have been asleep. In the morning, when Beau asked gently if she was well, Clementine chose the truth instead of her usual practice deflection, telling him plainly that she had very nearly written to her sister the night before about going home to Abilene. Beau set down his coffee cup carefully, giving the moment the same unhurried attention he gave to everything that mattered to him, and asked her only, quietly, why. It was the first time in 7 years that Clementine had said the frightening truth out loud to another person rather than folding it away and carrying it alone, and the admission cracked something open between them that neither the porch talks nor the 11 quiet months before it had ever quite managed to reach. The moment marks the story's turning point, where avoidance finally gives way to the harder, riskier work of choosing to stay and be known. Just as Clementine begins to let herself trust the fragile, hard-won peace she has built with Beau, the story turns toward the past she thought she had buried for good. Gideon Marsh, the boy she loved and lost 7 years earlier, the boy whose silence taught her that wanting anything was dangerous, is about to walk back into her life, 7 years too late to change what already happened between them, but not too late to finally explain why the letters stopped and where he disappeared to. His return threatens to unravel the fragile trust Clementine has only just begun rebuilding with Beau, forcing her to face the one chapter of her past she never fully closed. Whether Gideon returned seeking forgiveness, explanation, or something more complicated will determine whether Clementine's second chance at love survives contact with her first. The next act sets up the central romantic tension of the story, love earned slowly through trust against the sudden reappearance of a love once lost through silence. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. It helps this channel more than you know.